Engage. So, we are going to begin this with talking about, for approximately half an hour, we're going to try to stick to half an hour, we're going to talk about the pilot of Star Trek Discovery, and just to be fair, we're going to do the first 2 hours of the Orville and a spare one for good luck, because Star Trek's had like 50 years ahead of it. I think throwing an extra one in there puts us nicely on schedule. Okay. So we're going to talk about the first 3 Orvilles, the first 2 Star Trek Discoveries. I think it's a fair matchup. Wow. Shall we?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
All right.
We've accepted your equation. You're Matthew.
Excellent. Well, here we are. So I'm Matthew. I'm going to be generally like trying to chair this a bit, try to keep things on track. This is Sonia, massive Star Trek fan. This is Vanya, also a Star Trek fan, going way back. Like, you were mentioning that your family was considering giving up a road trip because the Next Generation was going to be premiering.
Yeah,
and a VHS tape managed to save the day.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
yeah, long-time Trek fan.
So your whole family, you had a lot of people in your family were fans?
Yeah, my whole family's we're all Star Trek fans, for sure.
So this goes way back, everybody. This goes way back.
That's a family tradition.
Yeah, right?
I'm nervous now.
Now, the Orville was the first kid on the block, so I think we can probably start with the Orville to begin. And I think when we're like weighing out what is Star Trek, there are certain things to it that really that are essential Star Trek. There are characters, you know, going back to the triumvirate, the sort of Spock, Kirk, McCoy triumvirate. Yeah. The characters are super important, and getting them right in a pilot is not easy, especially when you look at the fact that it took 3 first episodes to get Kirk, Spock, and McCoy actually into an episode. So it can take some time to get there. There's also this whole moral play. Star Trek is about morality and how we can look through the science fiction lens at ourselves and see our problems mirrored on the screen and maybe learn something in a way that if we were just looking at modern day news wouldn't have been as effective. Yeah. So these are all really important things we want to talk about. The whole idea of Trekked it or wrecked it is like, how close to Roddenberry's vision do we get? Now, having said that, that doesn't make it good. Yeah. That is not necessarily good television. I'm glad you said that. Right?
Just because, yeah.
Because there's a lot of love for Star Trek Discovery doing what they're doing. But is it Star Trek? Like, in that sense. That's what we really want to get down to with this show. So, like I mentioned, the Orville kind of was the first kid on the block. So, what do you guys feel like? Let's start with the characters of the Orville. In that pilot, there's some heavy lifting. What did you think, Vanya?
I felt like, I know you were saying this before, it's a very introductory episode. You know, there's a whole scene where he's just basically breaking down who each person was in one scene.
Yes. When they're standing there. When he
roll
which
call.
Actually, it was all funny, but also made me laugh because of how how heavy-handed it was.
Yeah.
You know, I was just like, okay, next person. They should have just like walked up like, oh, it's me now, Lamar. You know what I mean? Like, so that was a little unsettling, but I mean, they're likable. The characters are very likable. Yeah. Like, I think all of them are.
I would say. Yeah. And I don't like Seth MacFarlane and stuff. Yeah. Anytime I see his face, I'm like, oh, it's that Seth MacFarlane. I don't know. But I gotta say, by episode 2 and definitely by episode 3, I really enjoy having Seth MacFarlane as the captain of the Orville. What do you think, Sonia?
Yes, I agree. Definitely by episode 3. I found episode 1, it was very heavy, Seth MacFarlane. It needed to be. And I was thrown off by it because usually his humor, his shows are not my favorite, and I obviously have a lot of affection for Star Trek, and I wanted to see it a certain way, and so it took me definitely 2 episodes to get used to him and to get used to the fact that his humor and that kind of humor that he's created there is actually very effective. It's used to deflate a lot of the high-mindedness that was in Star Trek. But by doing that, they actually explore and they promote a lot of the things that Star Trek was promoting. They just do it with that kind of sense of humor.
I think the humor in the Orville is a really interesting thing to talk about because it's even inside of 3 episodes started to really find itself because in the first one there were like blue goo jizz jokes and stuff, and it's like, all right, I can see how that's a sight gag. But by the third episode, there are really moments, even in the second one, where they manage to have, like, Jeffrey Tambor as the father of the captain is just delightful. It's the kind of it's the kind of conversations that humans will always have and have always had. And so to see them happen in this future 400 years from now gives you a sense of really feeling what these people are going through. Things have changed, but they haven't changed so much that we can't, be embarrassed by our parents talking about whether we should get a butt examination. Like, there are certain jokes that are totally toilet humor, but they're almost like the moments that would happen before the scene would begin on Star Trek The Next Generation. Or like it would last just a little bit longer than it would have, and you get the joke that wouldn't have been on Deep Space Nine.
Yeah, or like, it kind of reminded me of Worf's parents.
Yes!
A little bit, and like the butt humor obviously reminded me of prune juice, you know what I mean? Like, can't separate. But the only issue I have with Orville is that I sometimes wish it were pushed the envelope too funnier. Like, when it gets too sincere, like, which can be good, sometimes it's like, I'm like, well, no, you're losing a little bit of that. I agree. Almost wanted them to push it a little further to funny, because then, I sometimes it loses its identity in that, because it's like, it's a balancing act.
They're in a tricky place.
Yeah.
They're in a very tricky place, and I think we're going to find ourselves talking about tone pretty soon in these, because the tone of the Orville feels like The Next Generation, and then a joke that doesn't fit. Right. Every now and again, there's a joke that just doesn't fit.
Yeah. Yes.
And there's a line between comedic relief and an episode written by Brendan Braga that had some punch-ups from Seth MacFarlane. Because, make no mistake, there are Star Trek writers writing the Orville. Yeah. In fact, I think there's more people currently working on the Orville from Star Trek than currently working on Discovery, because most of them were fired. But
because they wanted to go another direction. They didn't want to go.
So now that we've had a chat about those characters, let's go to the characters on Discovery. In the pilot, we get to meet Saru. We get to meet Captain Philippa Georgiou, which I keep wanting to pronounce in a Greek way, but she doesn't, which is interesting. I love that in sort of a Battlestar Galactica kind of way, you have ethnic names belonging to people whose ethnicity you would never combine. But it's 300 years from now, so sure.
Yeah.
I think that's really great. Yeah. And then of course we get to meet Michael Burnham. These three characters are really the crux of what makes Discovery's pilot tick. And of course, T'Kuvma, this Klingon character that has gotten a lot of heat because there's been a visual redesign to the world of Star Trek with Discovery. And so Klingons don't exactly look like Klingons used to look.
And
now, this has happened before.
And they don't even sound like them. And they definitely, but visually, definitely was impossible to. I thought they were the Krull.
No, the Krills from the Orville.
Forgive me, I thought actually they reminded me of Idris Elba.
Oh, yes, Krull from Beyond.
That's right. Yeah.
Very similar look.
So, and also the way that they speak.
Oh my God.
Because of the prosthetics, I think that they all sound like they're having trouble speaking. So that threw me off. That was it's been difficult to the thing that's thrown me off about Discovery, and I think you said the same thing, Matt, was that you feel like you know what's happening, but you don't, because it's not. They've taken a little bit from the original series, and they've changed it, or they've added a technology perhaps that you can't imagine could have possibly have been invented at that point, or wouldn't have been. Yeah,
there are holograms and like Star Warsy looking things happening on Star Trek, and I could even. Yeah, the cloaking device is happening by people who shouldn't have it yet, and it's like, it's interesting. I'm wondering if it's all going to line up with the Prime timeline, or if they're just making something new and don't want to tell us. Because it's made in Toronto, this show, and so we've got friends who work on it, and my friends are telling me that trust me, it's all going to line up. So, I mean, I give Star Trek a wide berth, and so I'm hoping it does.
That's true.
But when it comes to wide berths and pilots, maybe Star Trek Discovery was trying to pay homage to the first captain who was not there after the pilot. Maybe they were trying to pay homage to Christopher Pike with the character that Michelle Yeoh plays. Because, spoiler alert, she does not make it past episode 2.
It's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking because when they were talking about captains when they weren't casted, I had a list of who I would want to be captain. She was in my top 3. Michelle Yeoh was in my top 3. And then I was like, look at me. I'm so smart, right? And then Goner. And then she did. And I was like, oh, come on.
And I must say that the job, the heavy lifting of a pilot, really, is to introduce you to the characters. And we listed off 4 characters.
Sorry, yes, and it took us away from that. Forgive me.
No,
Let's talk about the characters.
But there are 4 main characters that we meet. And by the end of this pilot, 2 of them are dead and 1 of them in jail.
Right.
And it's like, that is a different kind of pilot. The heavy lifting that's been done on the character of Philippa Georgiou and the character of Tekuvma. I mean, can you describe Philippa Georgiou? Can you describe who she is other than nice mentor?
Not really.
Yeah.
But, I mean, that way you can kind of imagine they can add whatever they want.
I guess.
By what people say about her in the future, right?
Or flashbacks.
Yeah.
That'd be great.
Yeah. They can just build on that forever. I do think, that it is based on how we watch TV now, which we're not used to in Star Trek, because Star Trek, most of the episodes haven't, they're older, right? So we didn't watch TV the same way when all the other shows came out, and now it's like basically a 13-hour movie that we're probably going to see.
It's a very different way of making television, unless you look at what Ron Moore did with Star Trek Deep Space Nine, because some of that stuff was really very serialized.
Right.
But not in this way. This is 15 hours, very much designed to be one thing. And in that respect, Discovery felt a little bit like a movie. Like, it began and ended, and it's like, well, this character who was kind of, not so great at her job and decided to be a mutineer, she went to jail for it. And you're like, yeah, that's the beginning, and that's the middle, and that's the end. Which is a strange thing to have happen in a pilot from Star Trek.
It's like the first part of a series of films. Like, we're gonna see, we're gonna see like the sequel, and then we're gonna, it's building on that.
Yeah.
From that.
And it's interesting to see how the characters have been built with this different shape.
Yeah.
How did you feel about those characters?
2 things. One, that I think that the things that happened to those 3, Matt, they sort of align with what I think Discovery's doing. It's sort of challenging the sense of order you got from, for example, TNG or Deep Space Nine. You always felt like the captain and the crew were going to win the day, right? And everything would be in order, and the Federation had a reputation for always making the right choice, following the Prime Directive, not firing first. So I think they're trying to challenge with these characters, and maybe that's a way of destabilizing our expectations. And 2, I think it's interesting. I personally think that she was indicted for being a mutineer, but she wasn't necessarily wrong. I mean, can we agree she wasn't necessarily that her choice was that she may have known better.
Yeah, she killed the Klingon by accident.
Yes,
and then she probably didn't give the right information to her captain for her to make the decision that Michael had made, which was, historically this worked for Vulcans. Maybe try it.
Right.
But I feel like that communication in some places worked really well. When Michael Burnham looked her captain in the eye and said, there are Klingons, we have to go to Red Alert. Yeah. There was that moment, and she was like, Red Alert.
Yeah, so, I love that moment.
That was a beautiful, number 1...
I feel like that was very
and captain,
Star Trek.
Yeah, that felt right. And then there were moments where they broke the cardinal Roddenberry rule, which is the team of basically competence porn. All the people on Star Trek.
Perfect. Yeah. They always feel like they're going to be able to know what to do.
Yeah, they're equipped. They're going to be great. Yeah. But they fought within, and that's kind of the first time that has happened in that way. And the writers said, we're specifically going to break this rule. And that begs the question, is it Roddenberry Trek? Which is interesting.
Yeah, it is in a way. Didn't Roddenberry try to he tried to bring new ideas.
Yeah.
And he broke rules, visual rules, right? And his ideas about the future were very forward thinking. So maybe in that spirit, they're doing something in the spirit of just breaking the rules.
I think so, Sonia. Like, I agree. Like, I think that it's Roddenberry in diversity.
Yeah.
It's Roddenberry in, I think like their intentions are very Roddenberry.
Yeah.
The outcome is not very Roddenberry. But then again, like Roddenberry after like season 2 of TNG, like he's not really there. You know what I mean? Because he didn't want very much conflict, and everything after that had a lot more conflict because the writers were like, what are we supposed to do without like
that's right.
conflict?
22.
So his vision as a whole, I think his vision is there, like his initial vision, and it is 10 years before Kirk,
but it is completely contemporary to the Cage.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So the look of Star Trek. Let's get into a little bit the tone of how it is made. The shadows we're seeing.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. Actually, before we get too deep into that, let's check the computer and see if we've got anyone making mention online.
Melissa wonders how important the Roddenberry rules are.
Okay, interesting. How important are the Roddenberry rules? That's a very good question, and I feel like the fact that we've seen the Next Generation overlap with Deep Space Nine and then overlap with Voyager and then have a bit of a break and then Enterprise, like that's all very much one chapter of Star Trek. Mm-hmm. One long 25-year chapter. Yeah. And then Star Trek sat idle for a while. Yes. And, the JJ movies came along, and honestly, if we have to Trek it or wreck it for the JJ movies, the first and second movies wrecked it all the way, in my opinion. The third one came right back around to some of the things that made Roddenberry's vision matter and played in 50 years of beautiful history. But ultimately, it was still just an action movie, and that's never been what Star Trek is.
That's true. I would say, like, on the superficial, if we're talking like superficial Roddenberry, like the first one, like the essence of the characters and the casting and that sort of thing, I guess that's Star Trek, but that's not like Star Trek, like the philosophies of Star Trek or anything. So they got those things right. If you're like watching it on that level, you've always been watching Star Trek on that level, then I'm happy for you.
And so there are people who are saying that Discovery was trying to get some of those fans. But the strange thing about that is those fans aren't enough to keep the movies going. No. So it's been diminishing returns.
Yeah.
So it's a very good question that Melissa has. Does Roddenberry's opinions matter?
Well, he wanted to explore the world. He wanted to know about the world, and he wanted to give us a show that showed people full of explorers.
Yeah. So and in an aspirational way.
Yes, that's right. Which is these two shows are very different approaches to that, for sure.
Yeah, because the Orville gives us that sense of, man, wouldn't this be the beautiful future that we'd like in some ways? Because, war and hunger, that's all been eradicated. That's great. And then the pilot of Star Trek Discovery gives us war, and the entire thing is set in this sort of, I don't want to say dystopian, but shit's not good, man.
Yeah,
they're on the verge of war. Yeah. Like, there has never been a Star Trek pilot that didn't end with something on the...
a glimmer of hope.
A glimmer of hope, whether it's a let's see what's out there, or it's time to get home, or this is going to be a hub of culture, and this is going to be an exciting adventure we're going to go on. Discovery, at the end of it, said you're going to jail for the rest of your life. Boom.
And they're fighting for their lives. Everybody's fighting for their lives.
In that way...
It's just survival.
Yeah, it was like... I've heard people call it Battlestar Trek Galactica. And, it has a huge... It's been hugely influenced by arguably the greatest science fiction of the 21st century. Battlestar Galactica is an incredible show. It is not Star Trek.
It's not Star Trek.
Yeah, the closest thing to it was Voyager. Yeah.
I wouldn't totally dismiss... Discovery as being not Star Trek yet. Like, I haven't given into that. I'm waiting for it to kind of gel to become that. It has potential. And when she's talking about certain Vulcan things in the first episode, and then it kind of changes to like back to being like quite warlike because the
Yeah.
Vulcans. She talks about the Vulcans shooting first,
Mhm.
which is very un-Star Trek and very un-Federation.
And Vulcans
very,
having mind melds that go across the universe
And
is
so
also very un-Star Trek.
I would say, yeah, his rules do matter
Okay.
to a certain extent.
Okay.
It doesn't, like, I want to see the overall story of Discovery, I think, because of the way that the show's been built. I think that's the way we have to look at it, like, as a long-term thing, as one big piece.
Yes.
So maybe it will reveal more of the rules that we are used to.
Yeah, it might become more familiar.
I don't
it might hit in line with what we were expecting.
I don't think all his rules
need to be
in place to be Star Trek.
I think if they want certain viewers, they're going to have to adhere to certain aspects of it, at least at certain times, right? Because just like the Star Wars, the first Star Wars, The Force Awakens, one of the reasons that so many of us who are Star Wars fans loved it was because there were some very predictable things that happened.
It was proof that you're going to get more Star Wars that looks like what you consider Star Wars. And that was an interesting thing about the Orville, because the Orville is giving us that feeling of nostalgic familiarity, which some people who don't love nostalgia are like, why has this show got the pacing of a show from the 80s? There's a bit of that I've heard about the Orville, and in the first and a bit the second episode I could see that, but by the third episode it was feeling more modern. It was becoming less no one, I think, has called it a parody.
No, that's what I was going to say. It's
a
parody of Star... to me, it feels like a parody.
Well, the funny thing is, I haven't heard anyone working on the Orville call it a parody.
Okay. Well,
I think it's just a funny Star Trek.
Right.
That doesn't have the word Star Trek Orville.
I do think it's making more of an effort. Well, it's seemingly making more of an effort. I don't know if Discovery's going to have, like, a big payoff. Like, you know what I mean? Where we're going to get that. But, the Orville's definitely making an effort to, like, land on those marks of this is Roddenberry, this is, like, Star Trek philosophy, we're dealing with morality, we're dealing with the human condition, and how our human condition affects other entities, and if we should impose those rules onto other people, just like how we do on Earth, like, how we thought of that on Earth, are we imposing on other cultures, that sort of thing. That's all part of Star Trek, you know. IDIC, right? Infinite diversity combinations, right? So, I don't know.
Well, let's hop on and see if the computer has anything to say.
Well, Derek Culliford found Discovery to be a darker series, which I think is in line with what everyone on the panel is saying. Yeah.
Yes, they manage conflict through extreme violence. Which is not something we've ever seen in the other.
Not so much.
No, and I wonder if
never at the beginning.
Never at the
That's
beginning,
the thing.
Right.
Like, you see the wreckage of Wolf 359 in Best of Both Worlds. You see the entire, like, Dominion War. There's violence, but you've got 3 years to fall in love with these characters before we're stepping into let's blow everything up, and there's gonna be such an amazing cost of life, and it's like you don't feel the life.
You know what I'd like to know? I'd like to know people who have never watched Star Trek, how they feel about Discovery. Because we have a connection to it, and maybe people are watching it today feel like it is a representation of what it feels like to be alive today.
Maybe
that kind of intensity, that kind of antagonism, and
is that what Star Trek is about? Is Star Trek about representing? Is Star Trek about representing the life we have now, or what Roddenberry always did, which was present a better future? Right. Is that what we should be doing? Because the Orville presents that better future, whereas we just get war.
You did say about the mirror, like, or about us as human beings, and if you really put Discovery into context of now, maybe it's perfect. You know what I mean? But at the same time, like, Roddenberry would be like, oh, it's the civil rights movement, so let's be better than what's happening now. Yeah. And that's his Star Trek. That's definitely Roddenberry's Star Trek.
Yeah, and, you know, the idea that the Klingons represented really the Russians back in the 60s and all the way through until this reinvention of the Klingons, where they're having, like, a hard time speaking through their mouthpieces, but hopefully they'll figure that out a little bit more. I feel like deciding to make them into this group of racial purists it creates an interesting analogy, But we are in a time where the Russians are more interesting in geopolitics than they have been in a very long time. If you're going to use the Klingons to be something, maybe keep them being the Russians and invent a whole new race that is obsessed with their own purity. And then we could have Klingons look like Klingons. And because we've all seen what a bald Klingon looks like. It looks like Christopher Plummer as General Chang.
Exactly.
And when you find one of the greatest actors in the world, you don't cover him in 9 pounds of latex. You get his performance. And that was one of the problems I had with what was going on with the prosthetics of the Klingons. I thought they looked really neat. But when they start to move and you realize they're barely emoting and they can hardly move their eyes and they can barely speak, you're burying actors' performances. And if you're going to spend 8 to 10 minutes of your pilot speaking Klingon, looking at rubber faces, you got to connect.
Yeah, because I even, at times, I wasn't sure which Klingon was speaking.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And it was definitely challenging and hopefully something that they might want to rethink.
Yeah, and we saw that in those holograms that many of the other Klingons looked a lot like the ones we were looking at. But maybe somewhere in there's a eugenics war Klingon who looks like a human with a mustache, and maybe there's a son of Moog up there somewhere. Maybe we've got the houses we recognize in there somewhere. Maybe these are Klingons we haven't met before. I'm hoping there's a way to draw this stuff together, because as a Star Trek fan, I've had years to rewatch a bunch of old Star Trek, and watching this the first time through, I was turned way off. Watching it the second time, I was a little bit more interested into it. I watched the Discovery pilot 3 times, and by the 3rd time, it started to feel a bit more like home. Initially, it was just Saru that I liked. Everything else was completely unlikable. Then I started to find Burnham was a little more enjoyable. Then, it slowly won me over. And I feel like that's a good trajectory if they can keep it up. The Orville wrapped me in a blanket right off.
I had the opposite reaction.
Me too.
The Orville took me until the 4th episode to really like Seth MacFarlane in it. But I'm still like you, not comfortable with the balance. I'm not loving the balance of the shows, the humor versus the sincerity. Although the moral ethical dilemma of 3 and 4.
Well, I found two to be quite beautiful with that idea of. When like humans used to put people in zoos.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Put animals in zoos. I thought that was very interesting.
I forgot about that. Yes, it was.
And it's like you raised a good point. The cage. That is really cool homage. The fact that they're playing that, I thought was quite a neat thing, because it was so dense. They were playing the meta Star Trek thing. They were also playing the humans evolved past putting animals in cages.
That's right.
And I feel like in the 3rd episode, they really approached conforming to gender norms in a beautiful way, and accepting a gender outside of what you believe is normal. I thought that was a wonderful analogy, a beautiful metaphor.
3rd episode definitely anchored me a little bit more, because it was feeling quite hollow in places. Because of that balance thing, but
you said it was a tough one. The 3rd one was a tough one.
The 3rd one actually kind of brought it more together.
Yeah, because...
But to watch it, right? It was tough, the decision.
When you look at an episode like Measure of a Man, when you're like, oh man, is Data going to be property, or is Data going to be alive?
Or even Dad.
Oh, that was brilliant.
Like those...
I forgot about that
one.
And
the end of those episodes end in the happy ending.
Yeah.
Whereas here we got the tragic.
Yes.
We are conforming this character to gender norms. Like it was interesting to give us the tragic answer.
But I thought it
was a good challenge.
It was handled in a we're over a half an hour, aren't we?
We're running a little late.
The way that Bordas reacted was actually eased my distress a little bit, because like you, I was very upset about the decision of the tribunal. But I don't know. I suppose that he's holding the baby, in the blanket, and accepted the child. And here are these two fathers. They're going to raise this child the way they would raise they would raise any child exactly the same way.
But when you talk about those court episodes like Measure Man or Dax, where, you know, it's a happy ending at the end and, you know, they get to go on with their lives. But if we look at TNG and we look at Outcast, then, and it's a gender episode, it's not a happy ending. So maybe it was an homage to that, right? Because it's not, you know, he doesn't, they are not able to be together, and she's altered just like the child.
Well, and the interesting thing is, in Outcast, it's a character we'll never see again.
Yes.
In Dax or with Data, they're going to be there the whole time, so you kind of know how it's going to end. But with this character, who could be the baby we see grow up for the rest of the Orville, it's very interesting to know that her origin began as a her, and now she's a he.
And we don't know how quickly that species grows either.
Yeah, I mean, they hatch an egg in 21 days, so it could go quickly. And now, I think it's time to really bring it around to Trek It or Wreck It. We're talking pilots of Star Trek. Did the first 3 hours of the Orville feel like it began a Star Trek journey?
Yes.
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 So they trekked it. What do you think? Did it begin a Star Trek journey?
Yes.
Yeah?
Just a different kind of one.
I'd say
one with a lot of levity.
I'd say they trekked it. So I think the Orville trekked it hard.
Okay. Yeah.
Now, Discovery. Those first 2 hours. Was that the beginning of a Star Trek journey?
Well, if it didn't say Star Trek Discovery, I would say.
If it said Dune. If it said The Expanse. If it said Dark Matter. Like, if it was named anything else, it would be a really cool hour of something. If it was called a movie.
I think it did.
Yeah?
I think it did
it was
in
Trek.
its own way. It was Trek.
Okay.
It was Trek in its own way.
How about you?
And
it's very difficult.
Isn't it, though?
I'm going to say yes, though.
Okay.
I think the reason is that it did have reminiscence, like the rule breaking and that sort. It did remind me of maybe something Kirk might do. You know what I mean? Like, and I think the essence of what she wanted to accomplish was very Star Trek. Mm-hmm. The way she went about it, you know, might bring it a little less than the Orville. Maybe trekked it a little less, but I still think trekked it.
Trekked it.
And despite despite what they're looking for scientifically, they are on a scientific search for things to help their civilization.
Well, I mean, the first 2 hours, there was no discovery whatsoever.
There wasn't actually. I'm sorry.
In every sense of the word. We didn't see the discovery. They didn't discover anything. No discovery.
Okay, so we know what Matt's is going to be.
Yeah.
Despite lack of discovery, I think they trekked it.
They trekked it? Okay.
Enough. They trekked it
I'm going to say I like the show. As a show, I would keep watching it. It ain't Star Trek for one reason and one reason alone, and it's that the end of a pilot, and a pilot itself, its job is to send me on a journey. And this episode failed in massive ways in that final scene in the tribunal with the 3 people in shadow and Burnham in shadow and Burnham's going to jail for the rest of her natural life.
It's journey to hell. It's a journey to hell.
That is not how you start a show. No. I think it is a massive misstep, and I think because of that episode wrecked. It did not trek.
I understand that. Yes. I definitely understand that. I do think that her responsibility, like, was very Star Trek to me in that tribunal. It was like how she took that on. Mm-hmm. And but also but I do understand where you're coming from, and that's it. But I do think I'm looking at pilots differently nowadays than I used to.
Yeah, we're talking about the heyday of 2-hour Star Trek pilots that were events. And you know what? If CBS wants to say, watch half of this here and then frigging log on and pay $6 or $10, and you're telling people this is an event. And so if you're going to create this event, and in Canada on Space or on Netflix, however else you're watching this, it's an event. It's 2 hours. It's a big story. And Star Trek always tells us, let's see what's out there. Mm-hmm. And this didn't.
Okay, guys, let's see what happens.
Right?
Next
episode.
episode.
Some good points there.
Yes, you did.
Now,
yes, you did.
Before we call this episode adjourned, let's see if there's anything else the computer's got to say.
You do have an agreement from Derek Culliford that the Orville did in fact trek it.
The Orville trekked it. All right.
Okay, we all agreed on that.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. Well, everyone, I feel like this was an excellent inaugural session of the Star Trek War. And so, kind of Star Trek and sort of Star Trek, almost Star Trek. We're going to see where things go in the next episodes. We are going to talk every week about the newest Orville, the newest Discovery, who trekked it, who wrecked it, who got the closest to being real Star Trek. And this is going to be a panel that shifts and changes and has different voices. You're going to talk to us online. You're going to tell us what you think. And we're going to find out where we're standing in the 21st century with Star Trek. I think it's going to be exciting.
Me too.
Vanya,
Yes.
Sonia,
Oh, yes.
It's been wonderful having you both here. Let's go on to the next episode.